I'm Gold Derby News and Features Editor Ray Richmond, and I'm welcoming Joanna Naugle from the FX on Hulu series The Bear to our TV Editors Meet the Experts panel. Joanna, The Bear is set and shot in Chicago in an Italian beef sandwich joint that's really more pressure cooker than restaurant. It's frenetic and intense and chaotic. Did you ever find it difficult or intimidating to edit footage resulting from that pace and tone?
Yeah, I remember when I first saw the dailies, I was like, this is insane. Like, there's no clean lines. Everyone's just yelling over each other at once. But once I talked to Chris Storer, the guy who created the show, who's so talented and just understands the world of the bear and the beef so well, he was like, as we're introducing people to this world, it should feel like they're drowning. It should just be like, you're thrown into the deep end. You're all of a sudden in a kitchen with all these people who are well-intentioned, but don't really know how to communicate. And so the first episode, especially, you're supposed to just start from this point of feeling like you have no idea what's going on. It's chaos. Nobody's in charge. And throughout the first season, we try to build towards, them kind of getting their act together, getting a little bit more organized. Obviously, there's some setbacks along the way. But so many people ask, like, is it stressful editing a stressful show? And it really isn't. I mean, I definitely feed off the energy that the actors are bringing, and they do a lot of like long takes. So they have a lot of that intensity and overlap already happening on set. And then we just try to find ways to ramp it up. And I remember I would show cuts to Chris and the producers, and I'd be like, make it faster, make it faster. And it was really exciting to be able to take out basically any breath so that at any moment you hear at least two voices, sometimes three, and just making it feel like you're in the kitchen with them, listening to the chaos and kind of along for the ride.
Well, I would imagine you felt a sense of kinship with the people trapped in the claustrophobic kitchen on the show. It had kind of eerie similarities to editing in post, doesn't it?
Definitely, yes. Adam Epstein, the other editor on the show, and I always talk about how there's definitely some similarities between a post team and a team that's in the kitchen. And, you're working with tight deadlines. You're all, trying to divide and conquer, so to speak, so that everyone's kind of adding their little bit to the episode or the dish or, the night at the restaurant to make it the best it can be. So yes, we've had a lot of analogies of cooking and putting together an episode and how they can definitely overlap.
How are you sharing your cuts, Joanna? Were you talking a lot with Chris Storer directly, working remotely from home, I surmise?
Yeah, we did basically the whole season remotely. And we were doing a lot of cutting while they were on set in Chicago, which ended up being great because we were assembling different episodes. And because so much of it is shot in one location on the set, we were able to be like, we could really use some additional chopping B-roll here. Or I remember specifically there was one episode where Carmy stays late in the second episode and he's scrubbing the floor, and it's supposed to just show that he's there all hours of the night, putting blood, sweat, and tears into this place. And we were like, how can we really emphasize that? And Chris was like, well, we're still on set. Why don't I just get a couple shots of like people putting their punch cards into their little, envelopes on the way home. And that was like the perfect addition that if we hadn't been cutting, maybe we wouldn't have had the time to get that and know that it would really complete the scene. So that was like a great kind of like back and forth of, most of the time they got what they needed, but anytime we wanted to pick something up, it really made it easier. So yeah, that was one of the pros of being remote and kind of working concurrently with shooting.
In that same second episode, Joanna, you have to edit a flashback where Carmy is being abused by his boss. How intense was that process for you? It looked particularly challenging, just that segment.
Yes, that's like the most terrifying Joel McHale has ever been in his life as his boss. That was actually one of the hardest scenes to cut because the first episode is all about establishing the beef and basically showing how dysfunctional it is there. And then the beginning of the next episode is showing the opposite. The opposite in some ways, opposite in that it's one of the best restaurants in the world, clearly still very dysfunctional, but we wanted to set up a completely different atmosphere. But instead of just being like, well, the beef is slow and this other restaurant is fast, it wasn't really about the pacing. It was more about like, okay, what are the things that we can do that just make it feel so different? So making it really quiet. We added a lot of digital motion to a lot of those shots to make it feel like it was seamless. Like Chris kept describing that as like, it's a symphony and everybody is doing like exactly what they need to. And it's this like organism that's just like living and breathing seamlessly. And then of course you have this horrible tyrant come in and he just starts berating Carmy. And throughout the scene, I really tried to make it feel like Carmy was trying to focus on what he's doing. And there's just this little like, demon on his shoulder who's distracting him. So a lot of times I would like cut away before Carmy finished what he was doing. I tried to cut around Carmy's blinks also to just make it feel like way more like heightened, like, oh, he's clearly just so uncomfortable. He can't even like, show any vulnerability, close his eyes, or, he can't do anything that feels like a normal functioning human because this guy is literally trying to ruin his life. And I actually cut with a different temp track because I really wanted to have like the tempo and pacing, but we knew we didn't want it to feel like upbeat or happy in any way. So anyway, we cut originally to a temp track and then took it out and put in something way more sparse. And I think we just really wanted to make it feel also so cold compared to the beef. Obviously, the beef has its problems, but it's warm, it's alive. There is joy amidst all the chaos. And this place was just so sanitary and lonely. And it could not be more different from what we saw in the first episode.
And oh my God, Joel McHale, as we've never seen him before. Yikes.
I know. He's like basically unrecognizable. You're like, oh my gosh.
Completely.
He's so good.
What made you decide, Joanna, to submit the pilot episode for your Emmy consideration rather than one of the others? Is it because it just covered so many bases in introducing the characters?
Yeah, I mean, we spent a lot of time on the pilot just figuring out like what is the show, and we did a lot of work with trying to figure out the pace right from the beginning. Like originally, a lot of the first scenes in that episode were kind of segmented, and we went and we saw Carmy cook the beef, and then he went and sold the jeans, and then he went to go see Ballbreaker. And I remember showing a cut to Chris Storer, and he was like, "This is great. Like, it's 10-minute intro. Can we make it 3 minutes?" And I was like, that's an interesting and intense note. Let's try it. So that's what led to this montage that kind of kicks off the episode. Obviously, he's on the bridge with the bear, but then after that, it's so much intercutting. And we basically threw everything in there all at once to kind of just like establish this is our show. You're in or you're out. It's going to be crazy, but introducing Carmy taking over the business, family photos, Chicago as a backstory. So it really was just like, okay, we're going to throw it all at you. Maybe you won't get everything at once, but this is the ride you're getting on. And then just adding a lot more to the characters throughout that episode and then throughout the season, and hopefully falling in love with all the people who make the beef what it is.
There was a lot of talk, I think, Joanna, about episode 7 and how it was filmed as the single unbroken 18-minute real-time shot. That had to be incredibly complex and difficult to pull off, but it worked beautifully in execution. What was it like to edit that?
Yeah, it's so great. I've gotten so much praise for working on that episode, and I'm like, I literally picked the right take and it was basically done. So I spent a lot of time on that first Chicago montage that actually was supposed to be in the pilot, and then we realized that the first episode should really be about Carmy, but by episode 7, we kind of had this love letter to Chicago to kick off the episode, and then we go into this one take. So what I did, because we really wanted to make sure we could pay off this pace that we've set up without cutting. So I spent a lot of time doing temp sound design. I think I had like 30 tracks of the production audio and then any sound you could possibly hear, the L train going by, the buzz of the fridge, of things breaking, pots and pans, a sizzle from something in the corner. So it was cool to make sure that we could build up that intensity without being able to change the take. And they did a whole day rehearsing it, and they filmed it 5 times. We used take number 2. They just kind of nailed it out of the gate. And it's such a great point in the season because at the end of episode 6, everyone's gelling, they're getting along. This great John Mayer song is playing that just feels like, okay, maybe they can do this. And then episode 7, it just kind of all slowly falls apart. So it's sad to see them step back, but it's important to then see where we're going in the finale.
We're going to wrap things here in a second, Joanna, but just wanted to know, just how did it feel to work on a show that blew up like The Bear did? I'll bet that made you popular at family gatherings and cocktail parties. I mean, it just became so much part of the zeitgeist last summer.
Yeah, it's so great when you're working on something and you're like, I think this is pretty cool. I think people are going to like it. And then it comes out and it does break through that bubble and people are talking about it. And for so long, I would tell my friends, oh yeah, working on the show about a chef. And then it came out and everyone was like, wow, this is really, really cool. So now as we're doing season 2, there's a lot more interest from family members for spoilers and stuff. I'm like, you got to wait, you got to watch it. But it's just so great. And I love hearing everyone using Yes Chef in their normal life now too. Brought it into the lexicon.
We journalists write Yes Chef all the time too in our articles.
Okay,
We're always cribbing and borrowing.
awesome.
Joanna, good luck to you with the upcoming Emmys. The Bear is currently streaming the 8 episodes of season 1 and premieres its 10 episode second season on June 22nd. Thanks for joining us at Gold Derby.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
I'm Gold Derby News and Features editor Ray Richmond, and I'm welcoming Phil Fowler from the new Peacock series Mrs. Davis to our TV editors Meet the Experts panel. Mrs. Davis tells the story of a nun, played brilliantly by Betty Gilpin, who is reluctantly commissioned to save the world from an omniscient artificial intelligence force that now controls humanity, which is not unlike real life these days. Phil, what was it about a show that's so eccentric and offbeat that made you want to join on? Did the pilot script win you over and speak to you?
Well, I first want to just congratulate you on summarizing Mrs. Davis. It's one of the hardest shows, I think, to summarize. And anyone who's watched the show knows how many twists and turns it takes and how convoluted the lore is within it. And so bravo to you for summarizing it up, and hopefully I don't have to now.
My pleasure.
I mean, I've been a big fan of Damon Lindelof for a long time. I've watched everything he's ever done. And so then when I got this script written by him and Tara Hernandez, I mean, I wish everyone could read the script because it's one of the funniest things I've ever read. And so much of the humor was written in the subtext of it, in the descriptions, and it's hilarious. And I even, when I first read it, thought maybe we should have a voiceover. Maybe we should have someone who says all of this description within the show because it's so funny. So it was just very unique. I mean, it starts off with a bloody battle in the mid-centuries, and then it jumps to a deserted island with a castaway who's trying to escape the island. And then we finally, 15 minutes into the show, meet the hero of it, Betty Gilpin playing Simone. And by the end of the pilot, she's sent on a quest for the Holy Grail. I mean, it was just like catnip for an editor because it got to cover so many different genres. And I mean, in the middle of it, there's a big chase scene where some German men are trying to chase down Simone and capture her with a giant net. She at one point jumps through a giant donut on a motorcycle. So it was just like nothing I've ever read. And I was so excited to be able to be a part of it.
And the nothing you've ever read also translates onto the screen. It's like nothing I've ever seen before too. I mean, we saw a mock decapitation right at the outset, and that told me, this is certainly going to be different. I guess the fact it was so wacky and visually arresting obviously appealed to you.
Yeah, it definitely appealed to me. And also, I was just, as a spectator, curious how they were going to pull this off, how a car with a giant magnifying glass would explode a truck full of jam. I was just curious from a production standpoint how they would pull that off, and also the challenges of an editor. How do I help that story and sell that with the cuts?
What conversations did you have with Tara and Damon regarding the pacing and what they were looking for from your edits?
A lot of the early conversations were about the tone of the show, and it's almost it's straddling a lot of different tones and a lot of different genres. It's on one hand a live action Looney Tunes. On the other hand, it's a Indiana Jones. On the other hand, it's a sci-fi show about AI, and it also is dealing with religion. So we had a lot of conversations about keeping it light, keeping the humor, but also rounding it with heart and making sure that the performance still felt grounded. And a lot of that also was in conversations about music. We spent a lot of time, the three of us on the pilot, trying different songs in different spots. There's an early montage with the nuns as we see Simone's life at the convent. And we tried all kinds of different music. We tried choral, we tried strings, orchestral music. And Damon ended up pitching this Dolly Parton song that I feel like kind of cemented the whole thing together and kind of gave us what our tone was for the show going forward, which was a little bit of a retro feel, but so we mixed genres a lot. And so over the course of the season, we got to just play a lot with the music, and that's a lot of fun. That's my favorite part, is cutting picture to music. And there's nothing more satisfying than when you lay in that perfect piece of music and the edits are all just hitting right in the best spot.
I'm imagining the show could be either a creative dream or a frightening nightmare for an editor, depending on your mindset. But you really did a masterful job here, Phil, of balancing the comedy and the absurdity in Mrs. Davis to create sort of an even tone in the show. And a lot of that has to live in the precision of the cuts you did, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that also is to the credit of the actors, and specifically Betty Gilpin. She's an editor's dream. I've been a fan of hers for probably 10 plus years, since I saw her on Nurse Jackie. And every take she gives is different. And so that's a blessing. And they're all good. They're all amazing, very, very different takes. What you saw on screen, sometimes that was the wackiest takes that we had for her, but also a lot of times there was even wackier takes, and she really is a brave actor who goes for it. And so that, as an editor, can be a challenge, because sometimes what you personally find the most entertaining and the wackiest and the biggest isn't always going to serve the story. So it's a constant honing in on what the tone needs to be. And a scene in the pilot that really personified that was the final scene where she's talking to Mrs. Davis via the teacher, the kindergarten teacher. And that was a scene where we could have played it completely comedic. We had all of those takes from Betty where she just played it very light. And that was a scene that Damon and I really worked on a lot together, where we ended up in a place where we had to create this arc with her character in that scene, where she starts off disbelieving Mrs. Davis, being skeptical, hating Mrs. Davis. And by the end, she needs to be convinced that this is a worthy quest and the stakes are high for her.
I would imagine it's things like that that made you decide to choose the series pilot as your Emmy submission, which has the colorful name of Mother of Mercy, the Call of the Horse. There's so much outrageous about this show, but that was what you chose for your submission.
Yeah, and all of the episode titles were generated by AI. The writers input the scripts, and AI generated these titles, which I can't think of any other title for this episode. It's perfection.
How is editing this show different than working on, say, Grease, Rise of the Pink Ladies, or a movie like The Lie?
They're all very different. Grease is a musical, and so that has its own challenges and fun in cutting big choreographed musical sequences. The Lie, which is one of my favorite projects I've cut, was a thriller and very much about the space and the beats and letting the tension rise. Mrs. Davis is the best of all worlds, in my opinion, because you get to play in all of the different genres, and you get to live in this fantasy world. And as an editor, every episode I edited had a different genre. I cut the pilot, but I also cut episode 3, which was Excalibur, which was a competition of all these men and women with their hands on a sword, and it was the genre was more of a Western in that episode. And then I cut episode 6, which is more of a Mission Impossible spy thriller. So what I loved about Mrs. Davis was I got to just play in all these different genres and live my best life cutting this footage.
You can see how different everything is. It was like doing a bunch of little mini movies where everything had a different tone. It was really fun. Phil, good luck to you at the upcoming Emmys. Mrs. Davis is currently streaming. It's 8 episodes over Peacock. Thanks for joining us at Gold Derby.
Thank you so much.
I'm Gold Derby News and Features editor Ray Richmond, and I'm welcoming Bob Ducsay from the new Peacock comedic drama Poker Face, starring Natasha Lyonne, to our TV Editors Meet the Experts panel. Bob, I know you've been Poker Face exec producer director Rian Johnson's go-to editor for a good while, working on Star Wars: The Last Jedi, Knives Out, and Glass Onion. And correct me if I'm wrong, weren't you editing Glass Onion when Rian approached you about Poker Face?
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. We were finishing the feature when production started on Poker Face, and so it was obviously challenging for the whole team to sort of take on this project as well. But you know, it was incredible fun, and Rian is very adept at dealing with a lot of things at the same time. So it was actually really a blast to do, even though we were still finishing up the feature.
How did Rian present the series to you?
Well, you know, interestingly enough, I mean, I knew about the series long before we even started production on Glass Onion, so it wasn't a surprise that this happened this way. And in fact, it was a little bit planned, although you know, I don't think that there was really ever any intention to have as much overlap as we did, but it's just the way the schedules worked out. You know, we talked about the series a bit before we started production on Glass Onion, and you know, obviously Rian you know, has a great deal of interest in the sort of whodunit genre, although this series is obviously different in a way because it follows more the sort of rhythms of something like Columbo, where the audience knows who did it, and it's really just a matter of Charlie figuring it out, which, you know, is quite comfortable as a format, and something that you can really get into the rhythms to over the course of a series. But it also creates some complications, of course, because you know, where our lead is not in the first act of each of the episodes, or is in the first act in some way that we're not aware of. So you have to find a way to you know, keep the story interesting and keep the audience engaged with something that you know, with characters that they're only going to spend time with in one episode. So it's a pretty interesting challenge, but I think a pretty great format.
Yeah, I was going to mention, Bob, that Poker Face, it is like 2 different shows every episode, where, you know, you have different villains at the beginning. You know, Natasha Lyonne is Charlie Cale, is at this woman with an extraordinary ability to tell if someone is lying just by looking at their face. She basically, the second half of every episode is her. She stars in all 10 episodes, investigating and solving these strange crimes at every stop on her journey on the lam herself. But I love how the show, as you mentioned, is done in the style of 70s mysteries like Columbo, where we see the perp commit the murder at the beginning, and then the rest of the hour surrounds how he or she gets discovered. It's a how catch him. I think that's how Peter Falk used to describe it. It's a how catch him.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Instead of a whodunit. And so are there unique challenges to editing that kind of show as opposed to one where we find out at the end?
Well, I think one of the main things, I mean, and look, you know, the screenplays do a lot of the heavy lifting up front, as does the casting. But the truth of it is that you need to keep the audience engaged, and especially, you know, before Charlie shows up, and you know, especially when you have a lead character and you know, an actress like Natasha Lyonne who is so dynamic, and you know, you you want to get to her. So you do have to keep things moving, and hopefully you create enough interest to keep people engaged through before Charlie appears. But again, I really do think that the screenplays do an enormous amount of that lifting, keeping it interesting. And all the crimes are quite different, and the motivations are quite different. So even though there's a comfortable rhythm from week to week, it is changed up quite a bit, which I think keeps the show from becoming stale, or keeps the sort of familiar structure different enough that you don't really know exactly how it's going to go.
Yeah, Bob, I know you edited the 9th episode, which I thought was terrific and beautifully done, which has the unique title of Escape from Shit Mountain.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's a fantastic name. Absolutely.
It is.
I mean, who wouldn't want to cut an episode of television that has that name?
You're being the play on Witch Mountain, of course.
Yes,
absolutely. And that was the episode you're submitting for Emmy consideration. Highly stylized, really dark, directed by Ryan, guest starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Stephanie Hsu. Oh my God, great performances, and edited by you. What was it like cutting that one?
Oh, it was fantastic. And, interestingly enough, it was the very first episode that we photographed. And so, that created some complexities, I think especially for Ryan and Natasha, in understanding that this is 9 episodes in, and this is where the character has gotten to, right from the outset, without the benefit of having shot the pilot episode or 101 first. And then I think editorially challenging in the same way, in that we're trying to figure out the tone and exactly how the show works. And, obviously we were well aware that this was far and away the darkest episode, and a little bit of an outlier as well. But we just sort of went with faith that this would all fit in with the rest of the series, which, it certainly has its dark moments, but is generally lighter than this episode. But I think one of the things that's great about it showing up as the 9th out of 10 episodes is that, the audience is in with the character, and I think they're willing to follow Charlie into this darker world of being isolated in this scary motel for an hour.
Your editing on that episode is really precise. It seems like you were cognizant in the pacing of honoring what seemed like obvious inspirations like The Shining and Psycho and Friday the 13th, and you all kind of threw them all into a blender, and that's what came out. Absolutely, and I think that and we all focus on these sorts of things, but that sort of precision, I think, was absolutely, as you point out, intentional, and the references are dead on. That level of sort of isolation and suspense and tension that comes out of often very quiet moments. I think one of the things that's interesting about the show and episode 9 in particular is that there's a lot of time without music, and it gives it a very stark isolated feeling, which I think is very successful in achieving the tone of that episode. With something so layered with plot and visuals like Knives Out and Glass Onion, and now Poker Face, you need to really be on your game as an editor, I would think. I mean, every cut literally has meaning. You're really as much a storyteller as your director, I think. I mean, is that how you see yourself as well? Well, I mean, I think really our job, no matter what the material, is to honor the screenplay and the vision of the director, and in so much of what we do is really based on the script and also the material that's presented, in the dailies. But at the same time, you really have to find ways to elevate everything that you do, and I think one of the things that's particularly difficult with murder mysteries or these sorts of genres is what you're telling the audience at a particular time is actually very, very critical, where it shows up, and sometimes that
sometimes that involves eliminating material that in the script you thought would be very useful for the audience to know, but actually in the end ends up tipping the audience off. So yes, I mean that's something that you always have to be extremely cognizant of when you're cutting a show like Poker Face, and in particular episode 9.
I would think it could be really easy to kind of screw up the narrative. That like, oh God, that one little edit sort of threw everything off. And everybody, shows like this, the fans are really watching things closely.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I think, we all do this in this job. We always have to put ourselves in the position of being a fresh audience member. It's part of the discipline that's required in our line of work. And it's a little bit extra elevated when there are mystery elements involved, because we know everything. I mean, we know everything that's happening from episode 1 all the way through 10, and so because of that, you have to find a way to put yourself in the position of the audience and make sure that you understand exactly what they're getting out of it, so that you don't again give away something that is going to put them ahead of ahead of what you want them to be or where you want them to be.
Bob, we're going to wrap. Good luck to you at the upcoming Emmys. Poker Face is currently streaming its 10 episodes at Peacock. And thanks for joining us at Gold Derby.
Hey, thanks so much. It was really fun.
I'm Gold Derby News and Features Editor Ray Richmond, and I'm welcoming James Renfroe from the new Apple TV Plus comedy Shrinking to our TV Editors Meet the Experts panel. James, I know you worked on all the odd episodes, odd in terms of number, not tone. Episodes 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. How did that schedule fall into place?
Well, I got a reach out from the line producer, Kip, who I'd worked with on a pilot 5 years ago or so that Bill was also a writer producer on. Brett Goldstein actually was in it as an actor pre-Ted Lasso. And so, yeah, I got a call saying the project was coming up in April. I didn't get a script, but was excited to work with them. I found out during that interview that James Consult was the director who I went to high school with and played baseball with. So that was a surprise and fun. I'd been sort of itching to work with him, and to have the excuse was a nice opportunity. And then they shot the pilot, and then Block shot the rest of the series with the 9 and 10 ended up being solos, I guess, but I tried to switch to the evens after the pilot just to sort of be selfish, but they didn't let me do it. If I could get away with the pilot and the finale, I was going to try.
Yeah, didn't quite happen. Well,
No.
Just to fill everyone in, Shrinking stars Jason Segel as a therapist grieving the recent death of his wife in a car accident, and struggling to find his way as a single dad and a professional. Its very talented cast includes Harrison Ford. Oh my God. James, what were the obstacles?
My thoughts exactly.
Oh my God,
one more time.
exactly. You're editing a show with Harrison
I
Ford.
had photos of me with Harrison Ford on my monitors. It was like, I'm like, I couldn't get past it. Didn't know about him when I said yes to the project either. So it was just like, it just kept leveling up.
Wow.
My interest and the quality of the
Well, that's why
project.
when you're a kid, that's your dream come true, and finally came true as an adult. What were the obstacles for you in trying to find the rhythm and pacing of Shrinking while cutting the early episodes in particular?
Pace was really the biggest thing. We did a lot of dirty overs, so like getting time out was relatively difficult and ultimately expensive. We did a lot of split screens for visual effects and stuff to sort of move things along. But the tone sort of was like present already. Credit to Jason Segel, who helped develop the project and is a lead on it. He crushed it. Watching him in dailies was really impressive. There were a lot of single camera stuff where I remember in episode 7 in particular, there's like a wake up sequence in the morning, and in that they only had the one camera, so they would shuffle the camera around, and he would have to remember all of the improv he had just done, and body positioning as he was waking up with Jessica, who plays the character Gabby. And it was just it was an instance in one small scene, but throughout up to that point, he was like constantly really professional on set. He was really guiding the other actors when we ever had the like montage sequence that's in that pilot. He was great with sort of feeding them and then getting stuff out of them. So that was like a really impressive to watch. And then, yeah, otherwise, you know, we ran into some stuff sort of early on. Those first episodes really were like the struggle, the 1 through 3 were for time and pace. But after that, we reshot some stuff that helped elevate the tone a little bit so that it wasn't quite so depressing. And then and added a little bit of comedy. And then and then by the time we were into that 4 or 5, the 4 script was really funny. The 5 script sort of gave a lot of opportunity for growth in the story and stuff. But once we got to that point, that things start to ease up a little bit. Bill is like, working with him is like a masterclass in editing. So getting him in the room, you know, we sort of cut everything, and then he was doing, you know, Ted Lasso, a Vince Vaughn show that's going to be coming out, I guess, at some point, and then and then Shrinking. So getting his attention was difficult, but once we got it, it was great to have.
I would imagine it might be challenging to find the editing sweet spot of a series that so seamlessly blends, you know, the elements of comedy and pathos, and that goes for laughs, but also very much wears its heart on its sleeve. You know, the intense emotional moments undercut with comedy. That's a challenge for sure for an edit.
Yeah, it was part of the task was like keeping things, when we were finding that ultimate pace, it was finding the ability to let things breathe so that we felt the emotion. I think Bill at one point was like, I want to punch somebody in the gut with emotion and then make them laugh after, or make them laugh and then punch. But either way, in each of our emotional scenes, in each of these emotional moments, the slushy scene between Jason's character and Luke's character near sort of towards the end of the pilot, you've got them having this slushy, and he's like revealing how his relationship with his wife ended, and still there's opportunities for jokes in that scene. So it was a nice challenge, and it was a pleasure to work on it. For me in particular, my comedy background, the scripts are funny, right? Like so that somebody can laugh in an episode shouldn't be a surprise. That should be like the bar. And then to get the audience to care about the characters, I think is the difference between having them show up every week and not. And I think we really did a good job of landing those characters. And Jimmy's character in particular, that first episode, he's a terrible person. He's at a terrible point in his life. He's bad as a dad, bad as a person relatively, and certainly bad at his career. And so to see his growth and to see that evolution of his throughout the series and having it established in the pilot, I thought was
yeah, Jimmy is just coming unglued for sure, and you just want to shake him. And we as the audience, though, I think, James, really care about these characters very early on, which is a testament, I think, to the care you also put into your cuts and making sure, you know, that you didn't shortchange the empathy. What was it about the pilot in particular that made you decide to submit that for Emmy consideration?
The producers told me to.
That'll do it.
I mean, I think that's a big part of it. It was 1 or 7. 7, I thought, was also like, you're far enough down into the story that the stuff plays, and I thought the opening sequence of that played really well. The benefit of the pilot is that it really does establish the show. The exchange with Jimmy and Alice at the end, tease up sort of this I don't know, a difference between how he says it later in the season versus there at the beginning of the season. It was like, I can't be around you because you look so much like your mom. At the end of the season, it's there's like a pride and a love there and an affection that's there. And I think the montage of him running through the stuff, the interview montage. There's a lot of like editorial stuff that feels, that was like fun to do. That's present in the pilot that I think separates it from some of the other stuff. But yeah, I mean, the truth is I enjoyed working on all of the shows. So it was hard to pick, yeah.
You do a great job, James. That's all the time we have. Best of luck at the forthcoming Emmys. Shrinking is currently streaming its 10 episode season 1 over at Apple TV Plus. Thanks for joining us at Gold Derby, sir.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Gold Derby News and Features Editor Ray Richmond, and I'm welcoming Dean Zimmerman from the Netflix hit Stranger Things to our TV Editors Meet the Experts panel. Dean, I'd ask you how much your job in cutting the show has changed since you started it way back in 2016, but it's obvious from watching your Emmy submission episode, the epic season 4 finale, The Piggyback. Oh my God, 2 hours and 20 minutes, 300 scenes, seemingly a new storyline introduced every 5 minutes. How are you even still here in one piece talking?
It was definitely a challenge, and to be fair, that's 2 hours and 20 minutes after almost 12 hours prior, which is, season 3 was just under, 8 hours of material with 8 episodes, and season 4 has 9 episodes and clocked in at just under 13 hours. So yeah, it was quite the hill to climb, to say the least.
It has to be an all-time record for an episode of a regular series, 140 minutes, 3 times longer than the normal length. I mean, for a television editor, that's got to be like running the Boston Marathon. Suddenly you're basically cutting a feature, and a ridiculously complex one at that. And not only that, then there's so many elements to keep track of. How long did it take you to cut The Piggyback? How much help did you have?
So the Piggyback definitely took, it took a long time to shoot as well, just because of the complexity of everything. So Kat Naranjo, who edits, has been with us since season 1. We collaborated last season on the finale. So we have a really great shorthand. So definitely enlisted her help. Also having to pick up the whole season because we lost an editor. With Nat having to go, it was just a very big daunting task. So yeah, it definitely required lots of help. Also had Casey Sahaki, who was nominated with me last year. He definitely, it was all hands on deck, to be perfectly honest, because the amount of material we were getting, and also it was the finale. It was the longest episode, but it was also the one where it required the most attention because it had 1,200 visual effects shots in it, which was almost a third of what we had for the season. So it was massive, and all that had to be done and approved and turned over to get started, so we could not only make it, but that it could look as good as it did, which is another testament to the show and how daunting of a task that we had to do in such a short amount of time.
Yes, so you're editing around all these 1,200 CGI visual effects, as you just said, and it's all state-of-the-art stuff. So, I mean, what a puzzle to put together. My God.
It was, and just let's throw everything into this one episode, right? So we had a CG creatures, we have these, massive location changes. We have all the different storylines that were going along. Like you said, introducing all these new characters, or wrapping up all these characters, if you will. And let's just throw a music video in there. So it's definitely, it definitely, encapsulated the spectrum of complexity for editing, for sure.
Yeah, how did coordinating the story and visuals to a Metallica video, how did that manifest itself? I mean, was that like almost like editing a separate episode in itself?
For sure. And it was honestly one of the hardest things to do because scripted, it's easy to write stuff and say, oh, I want, the music to start here and I want the lyrics to start here. But when you're dealing with CG creatures and time, right? that was the hardest part, is to make those beats happen within the constraints of a song that you're trying to cut to, along with the choreography of all the stuff that needs to happen within that. So that was definitely very complex. We had to do a lot of magic in music editing. We had to do a lot of magic in re-recording some of the guitar with one of I think James Hatfield's son actually re-recorded the guitar in the beginning, so that we can extend it and so we can hit the beats that we needed to. But that was definitely the most complex editing that we had to do on the season. And for me, just that was a muscle that was great to flex and to work really hard. Because again, you're dealing with CG creatures, you can time it out in your head, but until you actually see the animation, you have to also make sure the animation is believable. So all that kind of push and pull, all the departments from sound to music to visual effects and editorial all had to work in perfect harmony to make that sequence actually happen.
This is a radically different show that you're editing now than it was when you started off. I mean, it's like it's not even in the same galaxy.
We've definitely upped the ante for sure. And the complexity, really, that's really the trajectory that we've been following since season one. Is we kind of started out as this like Goonies meets, Stand By Me kind of thing, and now we've kind of turned into Nightmare on Elm Street on steroids with CG creatures. So it's definitely it's definitely grown, but I think that's what the Duffers really his intention was, is to have the show grow with the kids and the audience to grow with the kids. And with that, you're able to kind of push the envelope, if you will, with the horror and the gore and all that kind of stuff that got incorporated into season 4. That kind of, we pushed the envelope a little bit, and people seem to respond and like it. And we'll see what happens with the next season, the last season, I should say.
Assuming you're still able to function.
For sure.
Did you work? How closely do you work with the Duffer brothers on this stuff? I mean,
Very. So yeah,
they're real hands-on.
Very hands-on, and right from the start, we really connected as just individuals. We've kind of had this weird kinship as far as how our brains work and telling the story. We're all kind of on the same page, so they have the utmost trust in me to be able to experiment and try things, but at the end of the day know that I'll give them exactly what they want. So it's been great, and for all intents and purposes, it's really kind of that kind of freedom in the cutting room has led to lots of wonderful kind of surprises and enhancements to and listen, it also helps them grow to help write and do some stuff. They've from the very start, I kind of approached a few scenes with more of a comedic eye than that what originally was written, which is more of a dramatic tone, and so they've definitely used that springboard, if you will, to have license to write more comedy into the scripts, which is what you really, really need to maintain that balance of the horror and the watchability and the likability of all the characters, to have those comedic moments and those moments of pause.
Dean, that's all the time we have. I hope you're caught back up on your sleep. Good luck to you.
We're getting there.
Good luck to you at the forthcoming Emmys. You can see all 4 seasons of Stranger Things, including all of season 4, streaming on Netflix. Thanks for joining us at Gold Derby.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I'm Gold Derby News and Features Editor Ray Richmond, and I'm welcoming AJ Catoline from the Apple TV Plus hit Ted Lasso to our TV Editors Meet the Experts panel. AJ,
hi.
Howdy. Thanks for being here. Let's just jump right in. Tell me, what is the trickiest thing about editing Ted Lasso?
Probably knowing how much it touches so many fans out there. So, when we started Ted Lasso, we had no idea it was going to turn into such a, an international hit show. We thought it might just be a simple, the show started as a bunch of short little films and sketches. We thought it would just be that. So I think, season 1, it was loved. It came during the pandemic and touched so many lives. And season 2, that continued. And now season 3, it almost feels like there's a lot of pressure, on me as an editor to wonder, as I'm looking through this amazing dailies with our incredible cast and so many choices, like, well, which take should I use? Do I use this take? Which take would Twitter want me to use? Which take would the fans want me to use? And you really think about that, but you try not to let it, get to you. You stay in the zone, and what makes this show work. And so, so it's just been a lovely, amazing journey.
I would imagine it's just the depth of the popularity of this show and winning Best Comedy Series Emmys kind of came out of nowhere. Talk about, as you just alluded to, how much fun it is to work on a show like Ted Lasso that's literally become part of the national consciousness. I mean, it's grown into this phenomenon that rises above it being a mere TV show. I bet it makes you popular at family gatherings.
Yeah, I have family and friends are constantly reaching out to me with questions and asking me what's going to happen next, and I have to do my best not to give up any spoilers. But yeah, look, Jason Sudeikis has said many times, Ted Lasso is not a show. It's more than a show. It's a vibe. And, I think that's really true. I mean, it's amazing to watch our cast be invited to the White House to talk about mental health and to go to so many events where fans just approach them and talk about how the show has changed their lives. But look, I think what's really great about working on it is working with the genius that is Jason Sudeikis. He's absolutely wonderful. It's great that he gets so involved in editing. The entire show is his vision, and I think everyone on the crew realizes it's about how can we get the vision out of his head and onto the screen. And he loves to come in. He's there with us, 10 hours a day in the editing room, digging into the possibilities. And then this year, the cast came over a lot too. They were in town for a bunch of events, for our premiere night, and it was incredible to be screening. I think we were watching episode 7 in the edit bay with our whole crew, and we had Toheeb Jamo, who plays Sam Obasanya, and we had Billy Harris, who plays Colin Hughes, and Kola Bikini, and so many of the members of the team. And we're watching this screening, and about 10 minutes in, we hear a knock at the door, and in walks Brett Goldstein. So we had to hit stop and start again. But it's just great when you have everyone there. It's become a real family. I'm just honored to be part of the Richmond family, and proudly wearing the badge.
Indeed. What was different about cutting this show, AJ, in season 3 than it was in seasons 1 and 2?
Well, I think knowing that we're on an arc, first of all, a lot did not change. We, on season 1, when I started this show, my producer Kit Kroger, who also produces Shrinking, and Bill Lawrence, they only gave me and Melissa, my other co-editor, a handful of scripts, and so we didn't know where it was going. And then that continued through season 2, because Jason very much likes to work on things, up until, if you give him time, he'll take it. So he's constantly rewriting things as days before they shoot them. So we're not knowing where it's going to go. And that happened in season 3 as well. We didn't know exactly how it was going to end. And so it was a lot about, keeping things open. Literally, we don't lock shows, as they say, so we can go back in. And if we know, a quick example in season 2, I didn't necessarily know that Nate, the character of Nate, was going to betray Ted and betray the team, and reveal to the press, to Trent Krim, that Ted has panic attacks. So when that gets revealed in a later episode, I had to go backwards a few episodes and kind of recut a scene and have Nate clock something in a different way and use some different shots. So a lot of that is just kind of rolling with the show and knowing where it's going to go. We have a little editorial device we use on all the seasons. Season 1 began with a close-up shot of Rebecca, of Hannah Waddingham, and ends with a close-up shot of her. Season 2 begins with a close-up of Nate and ends with a close-up of him. And so season 3 begins with a close-up of Ted Lasso. So I knew that the arc of this show is going to be very much following, where Ted is going to end up this season. And also little things like knowing the show is a lot about fathers and the relationship with fathers. And so just following these moments and trying to track them throughout the show. But I think having the benefit of working on the last 2 seasons, that I was able to do that.
We always hear the term, we'll fix it in post. AJ, are there ever times where you feel like you literally have to fix what you're given?
Oh, sure. Jason is a big believer in that. He said to me many times that, the show is written 3 times. Once, first as a writer, then he writes it on set for the second time. But he said absolutely the show is rewritten for the 3rd and final time in the editing room. So that's a real compliment coming from him. He believes in the power of editing. So sure, there are several things. It was shot one way, but now knowing where we are, he wants to try it a different way. And then that kind of gets creative. My background as an editor comes from working in unscripted television and documentaries. So I think I've applied that to editing the show. Like, well, this is how they shot it and wrote it, but what do we have to try it in a different way? And we're constantly doing things with, Jason has a term, what movie magic can we do? Meaning that, like, he wants it this way, but we don't have it. So, what tools can you use as an editor to create some magic to then make the scene go the way he wants, or create a shot? We're doing a lot of split screens. There's a lot of visual effects which are invisible, which you wouldn't necessarily see as a viewer, but are there to make it flow. And, I think when we're doing our jobs, it is an art, but we do stay invisible, and you don't want to notice it. And then, not to mention the tons of visual effects that, we don't play an ounce of football in a single stadium. All that crowd is added later in visual effects, and those shots really come, to magic later, and it's great.
Yeah, people don't realize that stuff is layered in later on. You're submitting the 11th episode of the season, Mom City, for Emmy consideration. What is it about that one that makes you think it's your best cutting job?
Well, it's the penultimate episode, and I chose it. First of all, I co-edited it with my assistant editor, Alex Zabo, who's been with me since season 1. This show we worked together on for the first time, and Ted Lasso is a show about mentorship, so I'm so grateful for his help. And and it kind of needed it on season 3 because, the episodes are longer. We're still a half-hour comedy that stretches sometimes to, 50 minutes, an hour. Episode 11 felt really special because it combines the best of Ted Lasso. It's got a lot of incredible football action sequences, but a lot of heart and very emotional. And I still watch scenes from it, and I'm still getting misty-eyed and still touching me, even though I've seen it 1,000 times. It's a great episode that brings the arc of the character Jamie Tart to a real completion. He's really grown so much, and there's so, and Ted has some beautiful moments in it. The show's called Mom City, which is a play on Man City, and so Ted has some great moments in it as well. And that's what's so great about Jason Sudeikis and this show. It's a bit of a champagne problem. We have so many beautiful characters and cast that Jason is very generous and wants to give all these characters their storyline. So that's why the season 3 feels very full. And that's because there's a lot of stories that are worthy of exploration. And 11 feels really great. And I hope you enjoy it.
Good luck. AJ, best of luck at the upcoming Emmys. You can stream the first 2 seasons and 11 of the first 12 episodes of the 3rd season on Apple TV Plus, and you can catch the 3rd season finale on Wednesday, May 31st. Thanks for joining us at Gold Derby.
Thank you. Believe.
Welcome to this special Gold Derby Meet the Experts TV editor panel. I'm News and Features editor Ray Richmond, and I'm joined by editors Joanna Naugle of The Bear, Philip Fowler of Mrs. Davis, Bob Ducsay of Poker Face, James Renfroe of Shrinking, Dean Zimmerman of Stranger Things, and AJ Catoline of Ted Lasso, Hello, esteemed editors. It's exciting to have such a
Hello.
talented and accomplished group here today. And since you've all reached such a successful point in your professional lives, I'd like to ask, what made you decide this was going to be your career path? I don't think any kid grows up thinking, I really, really want to edit other people's stuff. But that's your passion. And in truth, I see you all not just as cutters, but storytellers. What pulled you into this world and made you decide editing was for you? Let's start with Joanna.
Yeah, I mean, some of my earliest memories as a kid are messing around with my parents' like VHS camera and doing little camera tricks of like, oh, if you press, record and then stop and then record again and someone will disappear. So like that's like the earliest memory I have of like the power of magical editing. But then I was lucky enough to go to NYU for film school, and I took a class where we actually shot on 16mm film. And we're actually cutting and taping it together on Steenbecks. And that's when I really just appreciated editing as, as we've all said, like the final draft of the story where you're actually putting it together for that last rewrite. And it was just like such a literal way of seeing, if you take this and put it next to this, like what emotion can you elicit? And I was so fortunate of like only ever using like iMovie, as I was starting out, being able to undo really quickly. So I think it put a lot more emphasis on what every cut means, making sure it's actually the right point. And yeah, just seeing how all those pieces can add up to telling an amazing story.
Philip,
NYU in the house. I just want to say that's so cool.
there you go.
Go
NYU.
Violets, I think.
Yeah, Violets.
Yeah.
Yeah, Phil, what about you?
I mean, I grew up in Wyoming, not the movie capital of the world, and but I thought everything that came to the movies and was obsessed with a lot of them. I was looking at your resume, Bob, and I saw that you had cut the Mummy movies back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
And something that my parents still don't let me live down is I came back from The Mummy Returns and I was quote unquote, I said, this is the best movie I've ever seen. And now anytime I say I saw a good movie, everyone always says, well, is it as good as The Mummy Returns? Been a few years since I've seen it, but I'm gonna still stick by that stance.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Steve Summers would be very happy to hear that.
What about you, Bob?
I really wanted to go to Tisch and I didn't get in. So I don't know what to say about that, but I went to USC and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I don't know, do I want to be a director, maybe cinematographer? These were things that I was interested in, and I just discovered editing there. I think it appealed to me, two sides of my brain. I'm kind of interested in technological things, but more importantly, I discovered what power of editing and what it could do, what it allowed you to do to create character and to tell a story. And I've done this long enough that I started out on film, and I found it, incredibly difficult dealing with the mechanical process of film, but somehow persevered long enough to hang in there for electronic editing, which I think just really opened up all the possibilities for me. I mean, the machines shouldn't necessarily be the thing, but I really locked in once we were able to start working electronically. So that's my path.
What about you, James? What made you decide I need to be an editor? And that's the only choice for career for me.
I didn't know that it was a career, honestly. I watched a ton of movies and TV and didn't really think it was real. I grew up in Georgia before it was a TV film place. So I think in college, they filmed a road trip on my campus and was like, oh, this is cool, I guess. But I started working as a projectionist in college and really fell in love with cutting the film and came out here to try to cut film, and then nobody cuts film. So I think I've worked on one project since then, shot on film, and we were digital anyway. But similar to Bob, it feeds multiple parts of my interests. I like the storytelling part. I like that it's on computers, even though I'm terrible at the other parts of computers. That part of it came pretty easily. I was taking a class in New York and did editing I edited a video of dogs pooping and fighting because that's where my tastes are, and just rocks there at Renfroe, and spent like the entire day there, and it didn't feel like I had been working. It didn't feel like it was time. It felt like I sort of fell into it and got lost in it. And I figured if you're going to do a job, I had just been interning with my uncle at like a law firm, and I was like, if you're going to do a job all day, it might as well be something that's fun. And then, yeah, got lucky, and then got lucky again, and then got lucky again, and then got lucky again. And I'm sure talent might be some of it, but I feel like luck is always part of the equation.
For everyone. And Dean, what got you roped into this?
Well, I mean, for me, it was, my dad's been cutting for 50 years. So, and being, probably one of the greatest editors I've ever known, and think is probably one of the best in the world. I was very lucky and fortunate to be just kind of, that was my life, going to see my dad at the studio, being in the cutting room. But what made me want to actually become and try to follow in his footsteps, if you will, was I went to the premiere of Rocky III when I was 13 years old and was bawling my eyes out at the end. And on the way home, my dad was like, "Hey, sorry I made you cry, son." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And it started this kind of obsessive every night questionnaire of, what do you do? How did you do that? Which then just led me to, that's what I want to do. I want to be able to affect people in certain ways and get them out of their mundane head for even just 2 hours for a movie or an hour for a TV show or whatever it may be. But just to have an impact in people's lives that they didn't think they could in something that you do. And it's also a very tangible thing. So for me, it's I'm very tactile. So working on the computers, working on film, which I was able to do a lot of. So I got to cut a lot of film.
Brag about it.
And do that transition. Yes. So you shouldn't be too jealous, because it was definitely much harder back then. But now it's just copy and delete. It's easy.
And
It was amazing, Dean, being at the Ace Eddies this year and seeing your dad get honored. It was a beautiful ceremony, and seeing the montage of his reel of work was just so inspiring. And
yeah, the crazy thing about that montage, there's probably 10 or 15 movies that didn't even make it in there because there just wasn't enough time.
Sure.
Yeah, it was amazing. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Of course.
AJ,
I'll quickly answer and say I also went to NYU like Joanna, and I went, when I came out to LA, I did a program at USC like Bob as well. And I always like to write. I was in theater as a kid, and I was always impressed with writing. And I think I learned quickly that editing is very much writing with picture and sound instead of words on a page. So yeah, back at, when I was in school, I'll date myself. We were cutting on 3/4 inch tape to tape, and it was just so frustrating. But I was very impressed how when you put a piece of music to different shots, they did that at NYU. They gave us a camera and they said, go around the city, get some shots, and come back and put them together into montages. And just which song you use would change the cut entirely. And I realized the power of it, but it was just so frustrating to do it on tape to tape. And if somebody said, oh, you got to make a change here, you just didn't want to do it. Like, it was just like, I don't have the energy to go back and to line up all those tapes. And again, but then when I went to USC, I saw my first Avid, and it blew my mind. I was like, oh my goodness, this is a game changer. And I think it was just mentorship with me. I had a lot of great mentors that I met in the post-production world, and they encouraged me to stick with it and to tell stories. And I got involved with a documentary that really, I guess at the time, was independent. And they said, we'll give you a shot to do this. And so I started cutting, and it just kind of grew from there, and trying different things. But yeah, I think that's the story for me, is mentorship. Yeah.
my other question, briefly for everyone, is what's a piece of advice you give to young and aspiring editors? Even if it's, no, don't stop, do anything else. I mean, I'm hoping it's not that. But let's go in reverse order. Back to you, AJ.
Oh boy. I think I tell them to cut whatever you can get your hands on, because, people won't, the challenging thing about this business is they don't want to give you a shot unless you've done exactly what they need to do. So it's a bit of a chicken egg scenario. So I'm constantly telling them to try things and put reels together. And also I think once they do get started, try to diversify in different genres. I guess I've cut 2 sports comedies now, if you want to call Ted Lasso a sports comedy, but even now I'm trying to be like, the fact that our show is so dramatic, I want to maybe now work more in drama. So I tell younger editors to just try different things, take chances, and network with other great editors, like the ones in this panel, and that will probably get you ahead and get people to know who you are. And there's a community of us, and we all support each other.
Dean, how do you corrupt the young minds of tomorrow?
Listen, I will definitely echo everything that AJ said for sure. I really encourage them to just be relentlessly ambitious and always be willing to try. And the biggest thing for me is always be open for suggestion. There's never a bad idea. There's always just not trying to implement it. And if you don't try, you'll never know if you can succeed. So again, with the technology we have today, Command D and try a different version. It's pretty much that simple. But again, just that, just show the willingness and wantingness and drive to do it, and put in the hours and the effort, and you'll be very successful.
James, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, same. I say cut anything you can get your hands on, even if that's like a scene I've already cut. It's helpful for me to see another version of it. I might see, oh, well, that, even if I'm learning an edit, not necessarily liking how it was put together, one good edit is all you need to change like a different scene. So I'd say that, and then sort of piggybacking on a little bit what AJ was saying. I find that like the last job you did is likely to be the next job you do. So if you are like doing only comedies, trying to find a way to find a comedy with heart might find a way to get you into dramas. And then having just a good attitude. I think if part of the process is collaboration, part of the process is making good relationships. And if you are combative, if you take every note personally, which I used to, but in like a I'm gonna cry kind of way, not a I'm gonna fight back kind of way. What do you mean best take? I thought so. Like be willing to allow what you did to change, because the truth is every single one of our, I won't speak for everyone, but likely every single one of our cuts is too long. Like there's air, there's fat, there's lines of dialogue we're desperate to cut, but can't. And so like, just sort of be open and flexible.
And from what I understand, there's no crying in editing.
There might be.
Not true. Not true.
I stand corrected. Bob?
I was just thinking, I have absolutely cried. There's no yeah. But much like yourself, I mean, it's funny hearing that. This isn't really the question, but early on in my career, I found it very difficult when I felt passionately about something to let it go, and it's problematic, and you really shouldn't do that. And I've learned that I can have a strong point of view, and you have to, because it's the job. But you're collaborating, so you just got to let some things go. But I think the thing I would say to people more than anything else is I don't think there's an absolute obstacle to success. I think the main thing, and I'm applying really how it's worked for me, but I've seen it in lots of other people, is just to work really, really hard. And if you want it, it'll happen. I actually truly believe that, because it's not the talent doesn't matter. It does. It's just that if you work really hard, especially over time, you get better regardless of what your talent level is. And if you're helpful to people, they will want to have you around.
Philip, what's your piece of advice?
Yeah, I echo so much of what all of you said, and I agree with you, Bob. I always tell aspiring editors that be someone who others would want to hang out with for long stretches of period of time. But one other thing that I think is really important outside of the actual craft of editing is have a balanced life and not let our work and editing be a 24/7 job. Something that I have had to learn in my career early on. I would work nonstop, weekends, free work, whatever it took to impress. And I thought that working long hours equaled better work. And I've learned over the years that you can work a good 8-hour day, just 5 days a week, and still do good work, and also have time to spend with your family and your friends and loved ones. And I think it makes the work better.
I think that's actually excellent advice, Phil. You know, we always think if we impress the hell out of everyone and just work ourselves to the bone, that it will pay dividends. And that just isn't always the case at all. It's quality rather than quantity too often, I think. Joanna?
Yeah, this is a tough question to go last on because everyone's already said so many great things I agree with. I was like, oh, gonna say that. But I guess my advice would be if you get the opportunity to get in the room and be a post PA or an assistant editor, I feel like the best AEs I've worked with are always like being proactive, thinking like 5 steps ahead. And if you're just sitting in, you know, your edit room waiting for someone to tell you what to do, you're not contributing to the team. And like, you know, maybe sometimes the work you do won't end up being used, but if you're like, you know what, I was thinking you might need sound effects for this scene, I went ahead and pulled some. Or, you know, I was thinking like we could already prep this for VFX because we're going to do this. Like just really trying to think of ways to be involved will then just end with you getting more and more responsibility. And then, you know, when you get the chance to cut something, just, you know, you'll be ready to dive right in.
Excellent. Well, you have all just been terrific. Thank you so much. Congratulations to all of you. Such an impressive panel of television editors. Check out their shows if you haven't already. Once again, our panel has been Joanna Naugle for The Bear on Hulu, Phil Fowler for Mrs. Davis on Peacock, Bob Ducsay for Poker Face, also on Peacock, James Renfroe for Shrinking on Apple TV+, Dean Zimmerman for Stranger Things on Netflix, and AJ Catoline for Ted Lasso on Apple TV+. Their shows are currently streaming. Best of luck to all of you at the Emmys. And thanks for joining us at Gold Derby today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Much. Congratulations, everyone. Great work.